So, welcome to the latest episode of our podcast, And Why Is That? And as we've said in the past, the reason for it being And Why Is That is because we're trying to talk to subject matter experts about quite complex issues so that we can all understand a little bit more on each of those issues. Today, we've gone back to an issue we covered in a different way in terms of our defence, current defence capability, and we'll talk a little bit later with our guest, Andrew Horton. And Andrew, your official title at ASPI?
I'm a Director and Chief Operating Officer at ASPI.
At ASPI. Now, for those who might not know, we're today going to talk about hot diplomacy, Cold War, where we're at in our strategic competition in this Indo-Pacific area. Your organisation published this report.
That's correct, yes.
Just recently. In fact, last week, was it not?
Released last week, bit of a hot potato.
Got a bit of coverage.
And it has got already quite a lot of coverage. Didn't make you a huge fan in the Prime Minister.
Not expecting an invite to the Lodge anytime soon.
No, but as we were saying on the way up, perhaps that's in the context of what's going on, it might be a badge of honour. We don't know. I wouldn't suppose to presume that. But we'd like to start probably with a bit of a controversial question. Sure. And I know that you have some personal history in perhaps this area. So feel free to share as much as you wish or as little as you wish. Do we have operational capability and resources of strategic competitors working in Australia that could potentially be threatening our sovereignty right now?
Opening bowler, first ball bouncer.
Yep.
Look, I think the short answer is yes. And 2 weeks ago there was a fair bit of media which emanated out of the US in regard to this. But I will say it was something that was flagged by ASIO 2 years ago. And the case in point is the inverters on our solar battery units. But I'm just going to say anything that is manufactured within China, most likely from a hardware point of view or even a software point of view, there will be the potential of backdoor control, which is concerning. However, I need to say that this doesn't just happen with China, and I want to be really clear and acknowledge that not everything coming out of China is bad, but what we need to know is what is bad and what is good. But conversely, not everything coming out of the United States from a technological point of view is good. And we also need to know the difference. And so, we're living in this very unusual time where we're so used to this dynamic of major powers, but we now have tech power. And tech power is a really interesting element. And sometimes tech power is in our geopolitical advantage, and sometimes it's not. And it's not unilateral across all of our allied nations.
Mm. Well, if I can just jump in there, I think one of the most illuminating and scary things that happened in this decade has been the success of the COVID virus in laying waste to pretty much the entire world. And that wasn't overtly an attack by one country on another country, but it showed how easily you can control and bring to a halt the normal workings of many, many countries.
Yes.
If you then extrapolate that concept into electronics,
yes.
without which
Nothing
life is not possible,
yes.
And then build into that the fact that, everybody is carrying a
listening device
on their person, or it's on their
I'll
watch.
ask more about that in a minute.
Yes, or it's
Or
on their
a tracking
it's on their watch,
device.
or a
Tracking,
tracking
it is
device.
very much a tracking
Yes.
device.
So somebody can know where you are, can listen to your conversation, can use it for good to feed you more Google ads for
Correct.
you might be looking for a new carpet or
Correct.
something. But on the other hand, they might be able to keep an eye on where you are. And that's not even talking about people who are working in sensitive industries.
Yes.
That's just talking about mums and dads going about their business.
Yes.
To a certain extent, we, though, as population, have given up our right to privacy by acknowledging that, you know, when we say we agree to the terms of using the mobile
Who
phone,
reads it? Nobody.
nobody
Yes.
reads it.
Yes.
We've given
Yes.
up our right to privacy.
Yes.
So have we not, individually as well as from a state perspective, given up a lot of our personal
freedom.
security and freedom?
I think we have. I think a few things. I think there's an air gap in the knowledge of the capability of the technology and what the general public understands. And I think, and sort of part of the fundamental reason that ASPI was established was to try and address this air gap. And look, the second point I want to make is concerning and as scary as it is right now. The thing that concerns me enormously is we're only seeing about 0.005% of the capability of what you're really talking about is artificial intelligence. And the moment that we move to a quantum computing capability, it is going to accelerate in a way that is just unimaginable.
So without wanting to get into too much of the technology of quantum computing, which will make my brain explode, possibly everybody else's as well. Certainly not the geeks who are working on it, but the processing power is really the fundamental difference. Yes, the sheer volume. When we talk about surveillance societies, we know
Yes.
that China is a surveillance society.
Yes.
They have facial recognition. They have social credit scores. They have
Yes.
groups within the society
they
that
do.
keep an eye on everybody, et cetera, et cetera. And often people will say to me, but what do they do with all that data? Well, very soon there could be quantum computing that can do a lot with that data very, very quickly.
Correct. Look, I completely agree with everything you say, but I'm also going to say that I think it's foolish to think that our allied nations aren't doing the same.
Right.
Their settings are very different.
Yes.
And that's the important point, is that we're used to a rules-based order.
Yeah.
And we're dealing with adversaries who don't operate within a rules-based order. And I think part of the unsettling element right now of the geopolitical repositioning is that our friendly big brother, the United States, has diminished some of those rules. And we're sort of all at sea. Is that a big brother that we can absolutely trust? Or
Well, we have to, don't we?
we have to.
limited options. But one of the points that's becoming obvious at the moment is, and it's not really a situation. I mean, I've just visited the United States, had no trouble whatsoever coming and going,
Yes.
but I'm not the age group they're looking at.
Yes.
Right? So if I were 22 and turning up with a backpack and an arm full of tattoos,
Your
I think
mobile
they
phone
probably
would be checked.
I think
Yes.
they'd be looking at my mobile phone,
Yes.
which they were not doing a little while ago.
Correct.
But to Alexander's point, they might not even need to look at my mobile phone, right?
This is true. We're fast getting to that point of you'd be flagged, and before you even get to customs. So look, but let's not also go down a pathway of all technology is bad.
No.
I think one of the things that will naturally occur in the era of quantum is a lot of disease will fall away, and particularly things like cancer. We'll have the processing power to actually design individualized treatment for individuals, which we've never had the capability to do before. And that's just one standout example. So we have to look at these things, and I come back to the air gap. There could be great advancement for mankind, but it also comes with perils. And how do we manage that within our rules-based order? And the most important thing, and I think the thing I get frustrated about the most, is a lot of this information is kept from the public. And we need to do better at being able to communicate what you're actually up against.
But as communicators, we know that it's very difficult to get a complex idea
Yes.
out to the
Yes.
general public through the means of any type of media, whether it's legacy media or even
Yes.
modern media, social media, digital media, because people have a very short
they've been
attention
trained
span.
to have a very short attention.
And if it doesn't actually affect their ability to survive day to day,
That's
it's
right.
not really a first order priority.
Yes.
But it is a first order priority in the big scheme of things,
Yes.
because we have to keep the government's job is to keep people safe.
Absolutely correct. And, just to your point, if you're under 40 years of age, the most likely source of your news media is TikTok. And we know
Who controls TikTok.
who controls TikTok.
Yes.
And, the notion of misinformation and disinformation, comes to the forefront. And, the thing that we really have to get used to in this modern era is that, and this is my opinion, this is not ASPI's opinion, we're very used to the notion of kinetic warfare, but we're in an era of non-kinetic warfare, and we don't quite understand that. And we've been in an era of non-kinetic warfare, so non-violent warfare.
Constant competition.
Yeah.
So there's been no bloodshed.
There's been no bloodshed. And I think that's part of the apathy of society, is because there's no bodies in the street.
Yes.
We too tend to let it go. But within the context of our nation, Australia, I think hybrid warfare, hybrid asymmetric, non-kinetic warfare has been taking place for more than 30 years, and I don't think I'm the only one actually saying that.
So we asymmetric warfare is an excellent point.
Yes.
Because we've seen just in the last few days an amazing piece of asymmetric warfare where Kmart drones have taken out allegedly $7 billion worth of
allegedly one-third of a bomber fleet. Yes.
Of a bomber fleet.
Yes.
And so with that in mind, and also what you've been saying about technology, we're going to have to be very smart and have smart systems to fight the next war or to keep ourselves safe over the long term.
Yes.
So throwing this one out at you, why do we want submarines?
It's it's a very good question. It's a very good question, and I think there's a lot of people asking that question. Submarines and long-range missiles, the two things that the cost of defence report has indicated that's where we're throwing most of our defence spending, and we know that it'll be 10 years or longer, 10 to 20 years before we'll see the benefit of that.
So in effect, when we talk about over-horizon weapons, these are over-the-time horizon weapons. In other words, everything could be entirely different by the time these things even hit the water.
Likely?
Yeah, no,
oh, yes.
Just look at how much it's changed in the last week.
10 years.
Look,
Yes.
you are talking the issue of we're still dealing with analog versus this rapidly advancing digital world, and I think that has been the issue of conjecture with the report, is that what we have indicated is that because of this, there's a hollowing out, and we need to be thinking beyond the horizon, but we also need to be thinking very much in the immediate and mid-term. And there's plenty I can say on this, and I want to go to AUKUS. And AUKUS was designed with Pillar 1 and Pillar 2. And Pillar 1 is the build, the big pieces of machinery, which is our particularly our subs, and Pillar 2 relates to specifically the technology
Right.
that we overlay. I actually think we made a mistake in naming them Pillar 1 and Pillar 2.
It gives it a priority, which is
because in
perhaps out of
Western
whack.
society,
Yes.
you've always got to do one, before you
do
two.
two. Yes.
And so Pillar 2's been left behind. And I think something that we're saying very loudly is we need to bring that to the forefront. We actually need to be doing both at the same time. But it also speaks to the complexity of our economic circumstances. And I want to make a really important point here. Australia, I think I might have this number correct, but I think we're the 14th largest GDP in the world.
We're behind California, which is just a state. Yes.
However, when we measure economic complexity, our economic complexity has fallen by the wayside, and we're now 105 out of 135. And so effectively and controversially, we almost, at a high level, look like a third world economy. The majority of our GDP is generated through digging things out of the ground.
So we've become not much more than a mine.
And growing things and selling them. So we're very good at also growing and developing and selling food. But a lot of our other industries have fallen away. And so part of the issue that we also have is we don't, to have a good defence setting and posture, you need quite a complex economy. Now, the excuse that we always give as to why, we do a lot of R&D in this country, and in fact, this is the bizarre thing, we're 14th in GDP, we're 4th in innovation. So in the innovation index, we're 4th, but we end up innovating and then it moves offshore because we don't have the base here to actually look after that. And the excuse that we have continually used is that our population is not big enough. But the number one country in the economic complexity index is Singapore. And economic complexity,
slightly smaller.
Economic complexity basically is a statement of your economic resilience.
Yes.
And so but we're starting to see that flow into our defence settings. And, it's very concerning. What happens if, tomorrow our major trading partner decides that we'll go and buy iron ore, we'll go and buy liquid petroleum gas from other nation states?
So this brings me to a couple of questions. The first to the question of economic complexity, we have become a farm and a mine.
Yes.
Yeah. Which has its inevitable vulnerabilities because if somebody else is better at farming or mining, you're in deep trouble.
Yes.
Yeah? Or indeed, if your customers find a cheaper source of farming and mining, you're in deep trouble.
Or if there's conflict in the Taiwan Straits, where 57% of all of our ships move through, we're in deep trouble. Not just from a GDP point of view, but actual supply for the nation.
So that's the economic complexity challenge. And that's been successive governments have allowed that to occur.
That's correct. That's a really important point.
In terms of our defence policy and your report, we'll come in a minute to why ASPI was set up in the first place and the primary role. But let's just talk about the report. Your report suggests that we're doing exactly what you've said before. We're looking over the time horizon. We're not dealing with the stuff. We've prioritised it, not coincident, but in the traditional hierarchy, and it's perhaps the wrong hierarchy.
Well, I think we've also always had this view that if there's to be conflict, there would be a 10-year window and time frame, and we're now seeing that reduce, quite significantly.
So, do our trading relationships? I think I know the answer, but do our trading relationships inevitably, because they're so balanced on a pinhead, compromise an effective defence policy?
Look, there's it's a difficult issue. There is no doubt. I think for government, it's by far the most difficult. They're walking a tight rope, and this is an issue this is a whole of government, a whole of nation issue that right now is at the feet of the Albanese government, but the Albanese government is not the creator of the issue. This is
they've inherited it.
They've inherited the issue. But we have this tight rubber band, and at one end of our tight rubber band is our big brother, our major defence partner / partners, and the other end of the rubber band is our major economic partner.
And they happen to be strategic adversaries.
That's absolutely correct. And we know we've balanced this very well, but now we're as the geopolitical circumstance is probably a little warmer than it's been since the Second World War. It's getting more and more difficult to balance, and I think it wouldn't matter actually what side of government was in power. We have this issue here and now that we need to deal with. I need to say also, and this is my strong view, this is a whole of society issue. It's not just a government issue, and there is a responsibility on all of us as citizens of Australia to understand the issue and try to work with the issue and not just go, look, it's the government's issue. So
one of the things that we witnessed in the recent election, and the catastrophic campaign of the opposition, I think I'm fairly safe to say that anyone who's professional in communications thought it was catastrophic, and it proved to be so, was that there was a clear belief by the opposition that defence is not a topic anyone wants to talk about, so it doesn't buy us votes. So we're just going to drop the defence policy at the last possible minute, so nobody thinks about it too much, and then off we go. So there is a general internal political view that defence doesn't buy votes. Yes. So why should we bother?
Yeah, and
to your education point,
it has almost been an unpopular thing to discuss anything defence related. Are we warmongering? Look, no, we're not. What has fallen away significantly is this notion of deterrence, and the best example of that has actually been Europe, and so Europe. Things were going along quite nicely. So, do we really need that spend in our defence budget? And so defence budgets were whittled away, and then suddenly there was Ukraine. And now, if you have a look at what's actually happened in Europe, is almost without exception, their defence spending has ramped up, and the net defence spending is now more than what it would have been had they kept that deterrence up.
But also, I think they've offloaded a lot of their
responsibility.
Also their surplus weaponry that they
yes.
had, and now they're turning around going, "Oh, we need a few more of those," and the weapon suppliers are saying,
"Not that the big orange man is always right. No, he's not always wrong either."
Yes,
if one looks at the history of the last 110 years, Europe's security is dependent upon the Americans.
Yes.
And so he's not wrong to say you guys need to step up and do something. Yeah. But is his call, so this is to bring it back home, the call through Defence Secretary Hegseth that our allies in the Indo-Pacific need to be spending more, which was supported by the Defence Minister Miles on site at the Shangri-La gathering, dialogue I think they called it, in Singapore, was then immediately rescinded or contradicted by the Prime Minister, who said, almost channeling his John Howard, we will decide how much we spend on defence. How do they? I mean, is that just trying to keep our biggest trading partner happy?
I think I come back to the rubber band,
Yeah,
and you've got that tight balancing act, and we'll say a little bit this way, and we'll say a little bit that way. Look, I think ultimately Australia should not be dictated to as to its defence spend. The question I've probably been asked the most in the last couple of weeks is, are we spending enough? And
what are we spending it on?
Yes.
That's
Are we spending it on the right stuff?
That's a better question.
Yes.
And philosophically, as a country, have we completely moved away from the idea of hand-to-hand combat as opposed to letting the machines do it all?
Look,
because in your report it says defence doesn't have enough people.
Yes, look, we have we have just under 60,000 personnel in our defence force. We have an annual budget right now of 57 billion. We have also roughly 30,000 defence force reserves. So there's 90,000. That's not a small defence force, and our defence spend is not a small spend. Just remember, we are a small country, but our GDP is actually quite strong. We can always spend more, but to your point, I'm strongly of the view it's not just what we spend; it's how we spend, and we are moving very, very quickly into a very different world of underpinned by significant technological advancements. This year we'll see more technological advancement than we've seen in the history of mankind. Just in 12 months, that's how quickly it's accelerating. And I'm just going to say one more time, when we hit the quantum era, which is not going to be in 10 years' time, it is going to be within 2 to 4 years from what I see. And that's a very concerning thing as well, because most of our allied nations are still working on post-quantum encryption strategies 10 years down the track. We need to be bringing it's moving much faster than we anticipated. We need to be bringing it forward faster. But I'll come back to, and which brings me to all things ASPI. The most important thing that is going on that I've seen in certainly in my lifetime is that the dialogue, the talking in the community is really starting to pick up, and we need to be talking about these things. And these things, national security is not a political issue. It needs to be a whole of nation issue, and we need to have the courage to be able to say it as it is, but be fact-based in what we're actually stating. There's one thing I'd like to see is that the politics drops out of this, and that we look at it as a nation. As John knows, I come from a sporting background. The one thing I love about sport is when the green and gold is on, the politics drops away. Yes. No one gives it.
Everyone's on the same.
Everybody wants to be a winner.
Yeah, that's right. Yes. And we need to take that same posturing in regard to defence of our nation, because these are unusual times and we need to step up, and we need to step up now.
So just on the question of bipartisan political support, that is a nice segue to come back to why ASPI was set up, how it was set up.
Yes.
And are you, in fact, a conservative think tank, as might have been suggested by the Prime Minister, perhaps as he was walking that tightrope or stretching that rubber band, whichever analogy you want to use?
There is okay. So let's go to the foundation of ASPI. ASPI was set up in 2001 by Prime Minister John Howard and opposition leader Kim Beazley. It was set up.
Who had been a defence minister.
Quite a good one.
And is still a senior fellow of a distinguished fellow of ASPI. It was set up to provide contestable advice to the government on all things defence, national security. What we'd like to do is whenever we release a report, it is fact-based. So it's objective, not subjective. And to that point, cost of defence, something that most people wouldn't understand, is that report went to Defence 2 weeks beforehand for fact-checking.
Right.
And so every report that we develop, we actually put it out to all those who were mentioned for fact-checking. And I can tell you that Defence came back with 8 minor changes, of which we accepted 7. So they were completely across the report. And the report is based off the PBS Defence budget numbers. So, it is what it is. Look, there have been times, no doubt, where, and I can tell you my experience inside of ASPI, we've got a bit of everything. We've got people to the left, people that are right, people like me who sit right in the middle. My politics is the national interest. And I think if we're going to succeed as a nation, we really have to look at things objectively, and good policy is good policy. It doesn't matter where it comes from. But we also, I think we live in this strange time where I can agree with 99 things that you say, but that one thing that you and I disagree on, apparently we have to hate each other.
Well, this appears to be the primacy of feeling over fact.
Yes.
Yeah. We can dispute our interpretation of the facts.
Yes.
But the facts shouldn't be in dispute.
Yes.
Facts shouldn't be feelings.
But unfortunately, it would appear that if one's feelings are hurt, then, as you say, you're a mortal enemy. But that's a bit of a sidebar, but it does inform the public discussion. I'll come back to quantum in a minute, but it was interesting that the relatively recent, during the election campaign, circumnavigation of a task force from the Chinese People's Liberation Army Navy of Australia did cause significant public concern.
Yes.
And there was nothing to see here from the government, and no effective response from the opposition other than they should do something about it.
Yeah, look, I'll sort of give 2 comments here. The first one is in regard to the PLA Navy and the circumnavigation. Yes, they didn't do anything, let's use the term illegal. However, the way I'd describe it is it's like having the next door neighbour who is, has this very large party that goes to 4 a.m. in the morning and just doesn't tell you, and really ticks off the whole neighbourhood. It's just bad form, and we should have called it out as bad form. Here's the interesting piece, though. From what we observed within ASPI, we got more of a response from the US's positioning with Canada than we did in regard to the Navy. And it related to, can we trust our big brother? If they treat their neighbour like that, how are they going to treat us? And I just found that really interesting, in that was where we got the really big bump in attention, and suddenly everybody was beginning to wonder: are we standing on shaky ground?
Was the exercise that the PLA Navy conducted directed at us, or was it directed at the Americans more like to test their response, see what was going on?
Yeah, I think both. My experience with the CCP is that they don't ever do anything without intention, and they were just sending a very clear message. And we're here. Look, we've watched. They have militarized up like nothing we've ever seen. But there's been a lot of references to the militarization of pre-Second World War Germany. Well, times that by 1,000, you're not even close to what China has done over the last 10 years. And they'll tell you that's deterrence, but they're pushing boundaries.
2 questions that come out of that. and one is what's driving the great power geo-strategic competition in the Indo-Pacific. What are the end goals? And we can only guess at it, but you might be better informed than we. The end goals of the Chinese and the Americans. Is it just each one wants to have Pacific dominance or economic dominance? And we know now that we see, at least for the next 3 years,
yes,
a very transactional American president.
Yes, it's a very
who's just announced he's going to go visit his mate Xi,
Right.
Emperor Xi over in China.
right.
And God only knows what sort of deal he's going to do, but
He doesn't even know yet.
I don't think he knows either. Yes.
Well, critical minerals is going to be a very big issue for the US.
And we have a role in that.
Yeah, we do have a role in that, but we also have limitations in how quickly we can move. We've got the resources in the ground.
Yes.
It's getting the resources out and processing them and ticking all the boxes.
Up until I think we've done some work in that space, but 97% of lithium, for
Yes.
example, that's been taken out of Australia has been processed in China.
Yes. So coming back to your question, look, we'd all like to climb into Xi Jinping's mind. Maybe we wouldn't, but you could get 10 experts in a room, and you'll probably get 10 very different views. I look more at the actions, and what I'm seeing is an expansionary view. So there's just this constant pressure to expand the Chinese footprint, and that is what is causing the geopolitical tension in the region. That's different to what's taking place between China and the US. That's more about economic superiority, and we're obviously we have a non-traditional president in play, and we're all trying to work out exactly what that means. And just when we think we do, something else left field occurs. It's certainly it's an interesting time, and I don't think, certainly not in my lifetime, have I had so many conversations regarding politics and geopolitics.
Is there to dig into that a little bit more, is there it's not strategic, but a tactical advantage in having an unpredictable president in the White House? Does it keep Xi and other competitors slightly off balance, not sure exactly which way this is going to go?
Well, it's I think the loser in all of this is Putin, because what it's done in Europe is it's really aligned the European nations with their resolve against Putin's behaviour.
And they're building up their military, so it's going to be harder for him. His military couldn't take out the Ukrainians. What chance does he have against a revitalised French and Italian and German army?
Yes.
And the Germans, for the first time since the Second World War, have stationed troops in another country.
Yes.
In Lithuania, I think.
Yes. But also, if you have a look at the positioning of Japan is all of a sudden developing a defence base again, which they felt they'd never need to do, but they need to. So I think it's made all nation states look seriously at their sovereign risk, which includes Australia.
It's interesting. I was at a dinner relatively recently, with former Japanese ambassador Yamagami Shingo, who I'm sure you know well.
Lovely fellow.
We were talking about the Great Southeast Asian Co-Prosperity Sphere, which you might remember was the name, the euphemism used by the Japanese for the expanded Japanese empire that they were pursuing during WW2. And his comment was somewhat jocular, but very telling. And we've been down that road, and it doesn't really work.
Yes.
But he was very clear-eyed, as I'm sure you've had conversations about. We wake up every morning and we look across the Japan Sea to see what's going on.
Yes. Yes. Look, it's I think the uncertainty in our region, but it's not just our region. I think the uncertainty globally is a very concerning thing, and I'd like to think that it will settle back down, but we're not seeing any sign of that, and that's also concerning.
Just to come back to the quantum issue.
Yes.
I think we probably all agree that any projections as to how long it'll take for quantum computing capability to become a daily reality
Yes.
are conservative at best.
Yes.
Because if we look at the progress of all other technologies of the last 60 years,
Yes.
the projections as to how quickly it'll develop have always been
Yes.
Grossly
wrong.
incorrect.
Yeah. Look, there's two fundamental elements. One is chip manufacturing.
Yeah.
So being able to develop quantum chips.
And is Taiwan critical to that, or less so now?
I think Taiwan will be a player. There's 6 major players right now, but I think we've identified just under 30 that are entering and playing in the space of quantum chip development. So and certainly there's 4 that are moving to full scale production very quickly. And there's been a few surprises. Microsoft released a quantum a chip earlier in the year that caught everybody by surprise, which is 83,000 times greater capacity than NVIDIA's most efficient and effective chip.
I told you my mind
that's
would
just
blow up.
that's just one chip.
It's staggering stuff.
The second part is the complex part, is how do you join quantum chips, because you can't hardwire them because of the heat and the fact that you're pumping so much data down hardwiring. So that's where there's still some work to do. But I did recently travel to the US and the UK, and I spent a bit of time with a number of tech companies, and there's some really interesting things being done. We're not quite there yet, but I can see a very clear runway to being there. So my read is it will be within 2 years, but it would absolutely be within 4 years.
Will it be led by military?
Oh, that was precisely the question.
Yes. Yeah, will it be led by military? Because you seem to
Normally
see that.
is.
Well, military tends to lead innovation in times of war.
Yes.
Yes, but also the cost isn't as relative to the military.
Well,
relevant to the military.
And it's not a commercial enterprise.
No,
that's
right.
I think there's this wonderful term, dual-use technologies, and I think the really interesting thing is the overlay of technology into the world of defence and national security and national intelligence now. So it sort of happens hand in hand. And I come back to the economic complexity index, and the countries that are going to lead the charge in this will have advanced technology manufacturing, which will be dual use. Unfortunately, we don't. And I feel that's an area that we really need to be investing heavily into.
And do you think that exact point is part of the driving force behind China's desire to reunify Taiwan?
Look, I if you had have asked me 2 years ago, I would have said that Taiwan was all about, because the US really were controlling not the chip manufacturing in Taiwan, but where the chips were being exported to.
Right.
One thing that
So cutting off supply, basically.
Yeah. One thing that we absolutely know now is it's almost impossible to cut off supply. So to this point, I had this really interesting and enlightening moment last year. I was in far northwestern Australia, and I was on a crayfish boat, And I asked the question of,
As you do.
Yeah.
What's for supper?
Yes.
Did the Chinese export bans on crayfish impact you? And they laughed at me, and I went, I don't, "Why is this funny?" And they said, "Well, actually, it increased
The volume.
our exports." And I said, "How?" And they said, "Well, as soon as it was announced, 2 days later, we had
They went mental and just
they had Chinese officials come visit them
right.
and organise for the crayfish to be exported to
third
Vietnam.
party.
Vietnam and then moved from the
And the Vietnamese decided they quite liked the crayfish as well.
right.
So they've been supplying more crayfish, or at that time were supplying.
And so that suggests that, as you mentioned, that tightrope or rubber band or whatever you want to call it, of hot diplomacy, Cold War, what is said as, we're putting sanctions on you and we're doing this, and then in the background other things are going on.
That's right.
To serve their own interests, to keep
Yes.
their own population happy,
Yes.
and also to progress their geostrategic goals.
Yes, we are today a global a community, a global economy. And one of the things that we also observed with the Trump 2.0 is in the first few weeks, which were
Chaotic.
But we saw decisions made, and we saw the global financial markets act as a global financial market, and suddenly decisions had to be walked back. And so it's not just that we're so used to, I'll come back to, we're so used to superpowers and mid-powers and soft powers. We've now got tech power, which we have to take into consideration, but we've also got the global financial markets, which will act outside of whatever a president or a world leader decides.
Can they influence them, though?
There's no doubt they
Clearly
influence
they do.
them. Yeah,
They have
there's
already.
no doubt. And so I think, and I don't want to suggest
It's the bond market, that drove
correct.
Trump to do his deals on his tariff.
Correct. So there's this sort of it's this crossover into civil society, which in some respects may be the anchor that or the keel that steadies what is actually going on. So and we know that the economic consequences of China taking too big a step would be devastating for China, but that's economic consequences. That would be driven by global markets.
So what you're saying is that our global economic codependence is a leveling force
I think so.
on overt strategic aggression.
Which is good news for us.
Yes.
As we have China as a major trading partner.
Yes.
It's also good news for us because, from what Andrew is saying, we're a little exposed. Yeah.
Look, we are. I think if there's two summary points for me, I think one is that we need to double down and address our short-term and mid-term defence posturing, which I think is going to mean spending more money in defence. We're currently at 2.02% of GDP. We're looking to lift it over the next 7 to 8 years to about 2.34, 2.35. Look, I think we've got to get beyond 2.5, and so anywhere between sort of 2.5 and 2.75 is probably needed right at this time. But I think, coming back to your point, it's very much on how we spend it, not on how much we have to spend.
And in the public view,
yes,
as you've suggested, no matter which colour government we have, and it's likely to be one colour for the next 6 years at least,
yes,
unless something absolutely drastic were to happen.
Yes.
In the public view, there's got to be that balance between the big brother and the other big brother on a trading front, the defence ally, who are also a strong economic partner, and our biggest client, who are a strategic competitor to the other. So you can expect to have those sorts of strange commentary coming from the politicians and trying not to upset one or the other. Yes,
that's right. They've got to play both sides, and in the national interest, I think For me, though, the bigger issue is our economic complexity.
Yeah.
And we have to address that. And our economic complexity is by far our biggest sovereign risk.
So one of the things that's fascinating, that our economic complexity is the biggest sovereign. In other words, we are too dependent on mining and farming.
Correct.
But one of the things that an area that we've worked in a bit is that the last American administration recognised that the processing of critical minerals, as I mentioned before, was heavily dependent upon China.
Yes.
And particularly lithium, which of course
Yes.
is required for
Yes.
all of the electric vehicles, the batteries.
Yes.
And so they introduced through the inflation, oxymoronically named Inflation Reduction Act.
Yes.
The big beautiful bill of Biden.
Another big beautiful bill. It's
Yep.
$64 billion into the economy, and let's call that a reduction of inflation. How that works, I don't know, but
Yes.
economists will probably tell you. But they put in place incentives whereby if an American company partners an Australian lithium producer to further process in Australia, it's considered to be onboarding domestic American production
Yes.
because we're a tier one defence partner.
Yes.
So there are things going on that the public doesn't see
Yes.
that potentially could help us dig out, to use the term, dig ourselves out of the hole of dependence.
Yes. Which, and ironically, we're talking
Yes.
about digging again.
Exactly. Yes.
The issue, the elephant in the room with critical minerals, if we're to progress our critical mineral industry, is the environmental impact of processing critical minerals. And I think, again, this is something that we should be discussing and debating. You can't sidestep the environmental issues in regard to processing of critical minerals. But I think that if we don't, our sovereign risk elevates to unacceptable levels. So somehow we need to, understand that. And it might be that we, quarantine certain parts of the country and say, okay, we can live with this, but just within these regions. Or
and again, it's a trade-off.
Yeah,
but our competitor in that space doesn't have any of those restrictions.
that's correct.
No.
That's correct.
But how does that, what you just mentioned about critical minerals, does that also apply to yellow cake?
Well, it's again a good question that should be, in the, debated publicly. Yes, I think we've learnt from the past election that the whole notion of anything to do with nuclear energy, nuclear power, nuclear supply of
Weapons
weapons
systems.
is unpalatable to Australians.
I would contend that's more of a communication issue, quite
I-
frankly.
I-
I think I fully agree with your view that Australians have a very good bullshit meter,
Yes,
and they do want to be informed.
yes,
But the opposition did an appalling job
yes,
of a half-baked policy,
yes,
and just wasn't sold properly, wasn't explained properly, wasn't thought through properly.
yes.
And I've never heard of anybody refusing to have a medical treatment that is based around nuclear
No,
medicine.
we haven't. But interestingly, that then brings us to a topic we'll discuss at another time, which
Baseload energy.
Baseload energy, correct. Because
Yes.
you can't diversify your economy without baseload energy.
Yes,
right?
And also that makes you a more technically
Advanced
society.
society.
when you have those
correct.
people in there.
And something that we're absolutely sidestepping is in this wonderful data era,
Yes.
the rise of data centers.
And how are those powered, do you think?
Yes.
Yes.
Which consume just extraordinary amounts of power. So baseload energy, comes back down to the same thing, which is our.
So it's no surprise that you see Bill Gates and Warren Buffett, who's now retired, but
Yes.
Berkshire Hathaway, cooperating on test SMRs, small modular reactors,
Yes,
that they will obviously place right next to Gates's data centres.
yes,
These things are voracious, have a voracious appetite for power, right?
Yes. I think it's inevitable that the nuclear energy debate will have to go back on the table.
Because we're kind of half pregnant at the moment, aren't we? We're
We are.
saying that in 10 or 15 years' time, we're going to have these nuclear-powered submarines, which won't have nuclear weapons.
Yeah.
Yes.
But we don't want to have a nuclear power industry
Which we
in
need
Australia,
to service the,
which we
okay. We don't
Yeah.
really need
and
it, but
it's
still.
it's about expertise, it's about complexity, it's about advanced technology.
Yeah. Look, I think most Australians would categorically tell you that if they could, clean energy could do the job, then it should be clean energy. But they'll also tell you that if we can't meet the baseload, power requirements, would you rather go out without energy or there's an alternative? They'll be choosing the alternative. And I think we need to be ready ahead of the curve because that time is coming.
So there wasn't, one more
Yeah,
thing. There wasn't much discussion in the cost of defence about nuclear proliferation.
Yes.
And we're seeing there's a lot of nuclear-armed countries that are tense with each other at the moment.
Yes.
We're out of that game completely. Does that make us more vulnerable, or is it not relevant?
I don't think we're out of the game. I just think we don't need to be in the game with our strategic alliances. I just don't think that we could add anything to that game at this point in time. If that position was to change, then I think we'd need to quickly rethink that.
Yeah.
But at this point in time, and interestingly, I listened to a sat with a former Japanese defence minister, and he was asked, why has Japan not contemplated, particularly with China and North Korea adjacent, both with significant nuclear capability, why have they not contemplated the same? And he said, very simply, we sit within the umbrella of the US's capability, and we couldn't add anything to it. It wouldn't make any sense.
The Americans have 78, I think, from last count, nuclear-powered subs, and they want a fleet of, I think, nearly 90 or more.
Yes.
You're right. What would we add to that, really?
Yeah, I think it would be coming back to how do we effectively spend our money. I don't think it would be effective use of money to enter into that race.
So, that's been illuminating, alarming in places.
Alarminating.
Alarminating. Yes, we can coin a new phrase.
Heard it here first, folks.
However, you can copyright that, yes. Yeah. However, for me, the most alarminating or alarming thing about it is the Promethean moment we're about to experience with the explosion of quantum computing and AI. And I suspect you're very right that it's much, much sooner than
yes.
people anticipate. And as with any new technology, its military and strategic application immediately changes the landscape that you're dealing with.
Yes.
So even down at the very rudimentary level that you mentioned before, which is the use of virtually domestic drones in a swarm to attack traditional forces. So that's just an example of asymmetrical warfare. Yep. But new technologies are always appropriated for military use throughout history.
Yes.
So I would suggest to anyone who's interested in this topic, and it should be everyone, as we've discussed, to get a hold of that report, which you can see online on your website.
That's right.
You can download it from
You can download it. Hours of fun for the whole family.
Yes.
Lots of graphs and pictures.
A riveting read.
A riveting read. It's a page turner.
Yes.
Oh, I just found a page with a drone.
That's the ghost bat.
The ghost bat. There you go. I think I might have seen a few of those being wandered around the middle of Australia at some point. Yes. But thank you very much, Andrew. That's been fantastic.
Thank you, gentlemen. It's been I really enjoyed it.
We are aware but not alarmed. I think is
I don't know.
No,
about
maybe
that. I
we're a
think it
little
might
alarmed.
Be a,
Yes,
might be a bit
maybe we're a
alarminated.
little alarmed
Yes.
that we will all become redundant in a couple of years.
Actually, that doesn't sound too bad. Where
Well,
will we get our food
so long as
from?
the AI keeps paying us, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Righto. Thank you very much, and look forward to hearing more from you in the future. You may be able to project yourself into the next podcast.
Yes.
And we'll be
A
back
hologram.
with more. And why is that? With topics many and various, including we're looking forward to chatting about autonomous vehicles.
And hopefully quantum computing as well.
Possibly quantum computing is a topic to be interrogated. Plus, we've already had an agreement from someone who has personally met and spent time with a particular Vlad of Russia to have a chat about what is he all about. So look out for that in coming episodes. Thanks again to Andrew Horton.
No pleasure.
Thank you.